Hello, how are you guys doing? Doing good? All right, I'd like to hear. I can't see anything, so I got to know something's going on out there. So, hello, my name is Miles Perkins. I'm the industry manager handling media and entertainment. And I am absolutely thrilled to be sitting here with Emma. And Emma is an amazing director, screenwriter. She has done just some amazing work. Your first script, I think, that you sold was The Waterman.
Yes.
And that was picked up by Oprah Winfrey. David Oyelowo, he directed and starred in it as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And what we're here to talk about is one of your new projects that you did just recently, called Life Rendered.
Yes.
And can you tell me a little bit about that project and kind of what it is? It was in Tribeca.
Yep.
And all that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I've been here at Unreal Engine Fest. It's really exciting. There's a lot of amazing technical conversations going on. For some of you out there who aren't so technical, don't fear, have no fear. I was once like you. So Unreal Engine is an amazing tool, and I first actually got interested in it during the start of the pandemic. My husband, who's actually here in the crowd, he's an avid video game player, and he was playing The Last of Us Part 2, and I paid attention to this one because of how cinematic it was. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this could take over, real actors one day. The cinematography is amazing. I'm choking up in some of these scenes. How was this made? And he suggested I check out Unreal Engine. And that's really a few things blew my mind with Unreal Engine. The first being that it was free, that I could download it in rural Colorado where we were during the pandemic and immediately start using it. Of course, I did that, opened it, and got way freaked out and was like, I'll never open it again. And I bit off more than I could chew, thinking this would change the world. But then, while being back in rural Colorado, a few things sort of clicked into place. The first is that the architecture of where I grew up, the barns and the old farmhouses, they haven't changed since the 1950s. But everyone has high-speed internet, and a few people have VR headsets, and everyone has, an iPhone or the latest phone technology. And it was this really interesting contrast between, what looks similar or the same from decades ago and what has changed. And that kind of the merging of those two worlds. And the second thing, being back home, I used to live in Los Angeles, and going home reminded me of when I was growing up in rural Colorado, how lonely I was and how I didn't fit in. And we got the internet and a computer at age 10, and my first sort of social identity happened online. And so all of these things together, the sort of discovery of Unreal Engine and being back home because of the pandemic and sort of remembering what it was like to be trapped in a place physically but have access to a whole universe virtually, inspired the idea of Life Rendered. So I have a visual cue. This is the poster for Life Rendered. It's currently on a festival circuit after premiering at Tribeca, a few more coming up, including Spark Animation, shameless plug. So all of these things began me really thinking about this film, Life Rendered, and then, this passion of, okay, as any filmmaker or storyteller out there knows, you have an idea for a project, well then how do you get it made?
So I'm not going to give anything away on what it is, and I think we have a little trailer.
Yeah.
But in essence, it's kind of about the duality that you have as an individual in the physical world, and how that you can kind of have that extension into the virtual world, but then the clash that happens there between those two worlds and a kind of reckoning. So, I mean, not to go into too much detail around that, but I do find that is kind of, from a creative point of view, thinking about this, thinking about you as a writer, and then thinking about your ability to take what is in your head and start to visualize it. I want to ask you a question before we get into the trailer. I want to ask you about, so you were in earnest were a screenwriter in 2015. In 2015, how did you visualize as you're writing? Like what, because you know that this is going to become a film. Is it just in your head, or, I mean, how do you structure that?
So the first thing I do from a screenwriting process is make a playlist. Music is everything.
Okay.
It brings up tone, and tone is something that's a little bit hard to describe because it has to come from your heart. It's all feeling. So the first thing I do is tone. But then on top of that, what I used to do, and sometimes I still do it in like the very beginning process, is create mood boards. How a particular scene looks, especially opening scene. Opening scene to me is like the anchoring point of the entire film. It's you're telling your audience, what is this about? How you set up expectations for how people should feel. But before really Life Rendered, and in 2015, as you said, when I began my journey as a professional screenwriter, it would be to create, look online and find, stills from other films, kind of put them together, listen to a playlist, and try to, create a scene out of something I had that was really kind of 2D and passive. It's challenging,
Right.
and it's still challenging to
Right.
this day.
Right. Yeah, because just in thinking about that process to me also. So one of the things that I know, and again, you're introduced to the engine. I want to just point out though, because it's a little odd, is that it's a game developer engine, which I don't equate with emotion. I don't equate like some of the things you're talking about, like setting the scene and wanting to be there and having a certain vibe. I don't equate the engine with that, but you do. And so you were introduced to this, you grabbed it. I don't know you to be a CG artist either
I'm
necessarily.
not.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Right? You're a screenwriter, a director. So can you tell me a little bit about, like, in discovering that, like, what kept you going forward, and because most people would just stop right there, like, I don't know what this is, it doesn't make any sense to me, this is for somebody else to do. Why did you actually go, nope, this is for me to do, I'm going to dig into this?
Yeah. So it's the fundamental challenge with screenwriting, where you're creating whenever you finish a screenplay, it's not actually the final form of what it is. It's the bones of what will be the film. It's the plan. And that's kind of the tragedy of screenwriting, that you pour your heart and soul into making people feel something that no one will experience what you've created, right? It's the script that will inspire the actors and the directors and the cinematographer. And so when I started working in Unreal Engine, first as in the fellowship program, being really daunted by figuring out materials and material instances, getting that out of the way. Still don't really understand it. The next thing that really kind of the big light bulb going off, aha moment, was Sequencer. And realizing that Unreal Engine, you could start building everything that a script cannot be. A film, and I talked about tone and emotion. Film is moving pictures. A screenplay doesn't even have pictures.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's part of the challenge. But suddenly, if you can use Unreal Engine to craft that opening scene, you want to have it, and I'll borrow from Life Rendered, you want to have it take place in a snowy tundra. Well, a snowy tundra feels a certain way,
Right.
even though it's just moving images. Like, you want to evoke a sense of cold, or in moments when when there's like warm firelight or something, you can create intimacy. And so suddenly using all of these tools like lighting, like setting, and especially like moving your camera around and editing, you begin to craft a true scene that can evoke emotion through the process that film does, which is moving image.
Right.
And you talk about tone with words, they only get you so far. Doing it like an animatic of your project, of your script, can do so much for you when you're actually then writing the rest of the screenplay.
Right. Well, so let's dig into that after we play
Sure.
the trailer, so that people can understand Maybe some have seen it, but at least we can kind of set the tone.
Why do you like it here? Why do you come here?
Helps me remember who I am.
Did you stay up late in that headset?
Not too late. Dad.
Okay, so that's just a little taste, of course, but the writing in Unreal part of it, right? Because, so I was really fortunate to observe you kind of go through a lot of this process and kind of actually define what this is, because I haven't really seen someone do that using the engine. Can you talk a little bit about what writing in Unreal means to you in this context?
For sure.
Yeah.
So we knew we were getting together the team to shoot Life Rendered, and we wanted to do, as you can see, it's a hybrid live action virtual production project. We wanted to shoot live action first, and when we started getting all the resources together, the crew, it was January, and we shot in Colorado, so snow everywhere. It's going to be a nightmare. So we had to wait until May and till June to film, but that gave us months of time. In that time, I had just finished the fellowship course and could do basic animation in Unreal Engine. And I thought, this is a 26-page script. Maybe I should just mess around with a few scenes in Unreal Engine using Mixamo animation and see where we get. And I ended up doing an animatic of the entire film. And why this is significant and a game changer for directors, especially as myself, a first-time director, with a script, you go through iterations, you go through drafts, and you never share the bad drafts, right? The early drafts with anybody, and it feels like a really safe, creative space.
Right.
Well, I ended up doing that with the animatic. I was able to experiment around with different shots and different pacing, and then share versions of that animatic with my cinematographer and my editor and even my actors and my producers, just to give them a sense of, okay, here's the film. And the more you can get people to dream the same dream, which right now it's all in your head or all on a page, the more you can get people, thinking and seeing the same thing, the more efficient your crew will be. And the other thing that's really important, and my producers loved me for this, I ended up cutting some pages of the script and some scenes that I realized were unnecessary.
Right.
And it helped me realize, no, this is actually what my story is. These are the moments of tension. These are the moments of emotional impact. It was like, it was an aha moment. And I could do it all, in rural Colorado in the safety of my computer and go through drafts. So when I got on set, I was really confident with what I wanted, which confidence but not arrogance is everything when you're a director.
So actually, I think you have, that typically the process is that you're going to go through something and you storyboard things out, but even a storyboard doesn't always convey everything about, especially I think, I don't know that everybody always realizes that as a director, your job is not the technical side. It's not to figure, your job is really to deliver the emotional resonance of the story. And that, I have to say, is a very interesting, coming from a more technical background, but seeing this intersection between creative and technology, oftentimes there's a complete blind spot for people to understand what a director is really going for and kind of what their role is there. Tell me a little bit about your process of what a storyboard might be like, as opposed to having something where you actually have your animatics that are getting into being really final pixel at some point.
Totally. So animatics are really useful for any film, but they typically only happen for animation.
Right.
And never for live action, for a variety of reasons. You want to leave some things open to discovery on set. But at the same time, and I've storyboarded, even Waterman, was storyboarded too with 2D images. It's still not a film. Film is moving pictures, moving images. And a huge part of cinema that can't be discounted is the editing process. How long a short or a shot lasts can say so much about, can deliver emotion. And really that's what, as you said, directing is. It's all about inducing or evoking an emotional response in an image. You sit in the theater and you watch something and you feel. That's the whole point. It's manipulative,
Right.
but in a good way ultimately.
Right.
And that's what, again, being able to storyboard and figure out, one of the big discoveries was how the necessity of a slow pace in order to really capture the feelings of loneliness, but then also when, spoiler alert, it's ultimately, the film is about a father and son, when they finally reconnect,
Right.
making sure that moment landed, and having the pacing figured out to be able to tell that story most effectively. So again, we had a lot of time before we filmed. So what I did, I built the virtual sets. I animated using Mixamo characters. And what's really crazy is, how much a lot of the animatic ended up becoming used actually in a direct one-to-one with final images in the film. So, you can even see here, it takes place in rural Colorado. So, there are certain things that are iconic about a Western, right? Silhouettes. And, I had conversations with my cinematographer about silhouettes, and it wasn't just, oh, it's an iconic Western thing, but silhouettes can also kind of evoke someone being trapped, right? A use of negative space in order to make someone feel like they're boxed in, and to really evoke through image alone the feeling of loneliness. And so we loved the idea of silhouettes, and you can see there's a lot from this animatic that made it in. And then similarly here, it's a two-hander, as they say, where the father and son are both the main character. And so really, how do we use lighting and composition in order to show that the father's also going through his own form of loneliness too. Yeah, it's
Well,
just crazy looking at things.
And I'm struck by it in watching this film also, the rhythm of it, right? There's something about it where it feels whole, right? And not everything feels that way always. Where you start to get where the pace starts to, it goes fast, it goes slow. This one has just a very consistent roll to it, and I would imagine that would actually be difficult to do had you not done this, right? Because it's almost like you had set that tempo ahead of time.
Totally. One of the biggest learnings, I feel like, and successes was having the editor watch this. After we shot, it's kind of what we ended up doing. We shot the motion capture first before we finished all the kind of virtual side of things. And then we had all of our live action footage. And we wanted to figure out, okay, and we treated our virtual production shoot kind of like a live action shoot, which we can get into in a minute. But basically we had a ton of footage and we needed to edit it down before we really got into like the final virtual production polish. And I felt I was a little too close for the first cut. It's like, I can't cut anything. Suddenly this is a 50-minute short, uh-oh. And I told my editor, I'm gonna give you a week, cut it down. It has to be under 25 minutes.
Right.
See what happens. And he had seen this animatic, and he ended up, he got it down to about 30, and we finessed from there. But because he knew how important the pacing was, he did not try and cut down every scene just to fit it in. He was ruthless in cutting whole scenes away, and really, diving deep into what this moment meant, and being really kind of true to the North Star of of the tone of the film through pacing, which he absolutely borrowed
Right.
from the animatic, which
Right.
is awesome.
Yeah.
So efficient.
Yeah, efficient, but also I don't know how you get that otherwise in a way. You know what I mean? Because I mean, in directing, you are directing something, but if you're directing to something, I would imagine it makes that a little bit easier as well, and everybody's on the same page. That's the other part, right?
That's the huge, everyone is on the same page.
Right.
The whole idea of you're dreaming the same dream. When it's all up here,
Right.
you know, you can use your words or you can draw it out to communicate.
Right.
But having an actual, you know, animatic of the film, everyone gets it.
Right.
In a way that where you as a director may sometimes, like when we filmed and I felt like, oh, every frame, I love it, we can't cut it. The editor felt empowered knowing the North Star of what I wanted. He knew how to get it there, which is amazing.
Right. Yeah. You know, so the other thing I find fascinating in this is that I always like to say everything should have a narrative. So even in some ways, not even very clearly, the Unreal Engine itself has a narrative, and there's an exploration that it's going through right now as well, in how it's being used even. And so I kind of, it's interesting to me to hear from you really talking from the perspective of story, yet using this tool, which I don't think that the developers, when they're doing it, they're thinking, okay, yeah, Emma's going to be sitting there and she's going to, you know, from a director's point of view, she's going to be, oh, so I should have this menu there. How did you deal with that? Like, what problem were you solving with this technology? Like, you know what I mean? Because I find it kind of fascinating. It doesn't seem like a fit until I really see that you've made it really, really fit and work in a way that it's not intuitive
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, all credit where credit is due to the developers working in Sequencer. You know, even for those of you who have dabbled in Unreal Engine, these are sets that I bought on the marketplace. Also, credit to the marketplace. Spent a lot of money there. But the marketplace is incredible, and everything you buy, you download into Unreal, and you open it, and it's right there. Amazing. And then, you know, you can move around different props. You know, I mentioned I had a digital social identity before a physical one. I also played The Sims a lot. So I do feel like whoever played The Sims and whoever wants to use Unreal Engine, there's something really natural there. But so these are all props, you know, I put down because I needed it, and it was an approximation of what the house could look like. I spent no time worrying about, you know, there's a word for it and I'm forgetting, optimization. I didn't care about that. You know, whatever lighting could work without getting too broken and looking weird, that's what I went with. What I cared about was not final pixel. What I cared about was how do I get an approximation of my film. And so that, I think, that's what I was paying attention to the entire time.
Right. So directing with intent, that's what we're kind of
yes.
talking about next here. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by that, like directing, you know, what is it about that with that intent that you have? What's the relationship there?
And so this is another part of the process that is really, really important, both for live action and for virtual production when you're a director. And that's when the machine starts to get spun up, when you get your cast and your crew and you're getting on set and then everyone is looking at you for direction and you need to point them in a direction and say, go. You need to be very clear with what your vision is and what you want. Because once that machine gets going, it's like a flywheel.
Right.
And so that's the thing about intent that means so much. Intent is really just asking yourself, why am I making this choice? And having a real clear answer for why it's the right choice for the story as well. And so there are kind of two different parts of the process here. One was the writing in Unreal, which is the, you know, use Mixamo characters, Mixamo animation, buy whatever you can off the marketplace. Who cares about optimization? I want an approximation.
Right.
The next thing is actually final pixel, what we want this project to look like, how it will be ready for theaters. And that's when intent starts to mean everything. Why are you making certain choices? The animatic ended up having a lot of ended up being really important for that too, for the virtual production side of it as well. Of like, okay, we're in Unreal Engine. It's a film about it's about a young gay man in rural Colorado who uses virtual reality to find romance and build worlds, while he also takes care of his disabled cowboy father. And so knowing that was the story. So what's the intent? Well, I wanted to tell a story about someone who makes virtual worlds, where the virtual worlds are fantastical and beautiful. And for a moment, it got really daunting when you can open Unreal Engine and do anything, right? Like at least with live action,
Right.
you're a little bit, constrained
Yeah.
by like what location you can get.
Yeah.
Not with Unreal Engine, you can do anything. And I'll admit, it was a little paralyzing at first to think, okay, if you can do anything, then what choice can you make? That's when intent became really important, especially when then you get your crew who are like, okay, we're ready. What do you want us to build?
Right.
And so the intent, right, of this film, the virtual world is an escape, okay? But not only that, the ending, spoiler alert, the ending, you find out one of the most meticulous worlds that the main character has made is of his ranch, of the ranch house where he has grown up and the beautiful ranch where he lives with his father. And the big kind of emotional moment comes when the father goes into his son's bedroom in the virtual world and sees, all these photographs of him and his lover, where he can, Mark is basically building a fantasy world of the real world where he can be himself.
Right.
Whew. Okay, so then knowing that is the emotional North Star,
Right.
then everything else about the virtual world, suddenly the choices become a lot more clear. For instance, we had this great location where he works, his day job is at a nursery. And so he spends all this time, around plants in the real world, kind of being a caretaker for plants. Well, the opening scene, one of the things he does to kind of impress his lover is to make a forest. He's a world builder. He can craft the virtual world to do whatever he wants. And he decides, he spends all day taking care of plants. And when he goes into the virtual world, he wants to take care of who he cares about by building up plants. And so suddenly you start finding all these interesting parallels that all build into this intent of the fantasy world as, yearning to become the real world.
Right.
Which is a really,
Right.
That's the whole North Star of the film,
Right.
which is really cool.
Right. Well, and the other part of this is being able to see that and understand that ahead of time to be able to really, even I was noticing even in the composition and the things that you were doing, there was that, like I said, duality of these two things, but that thing that was holding them together, which is a sense of self, regardless of whether you're in the real world or you're in the virtual world. And that was the thing that was holding it together.
Yes, beautifully said.
Yeah.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
Right, where, how do you tie these two worlds together in an evocative way?
Right.
And so, obviously from composition alone, you can see, and from the kind of story of the character alone, there's a real intent with every single scene, both live action and virtual. But we also, wanted to use some editing techniques to tie the characters together further. And so one thing we did, this idea of match cuts. So you match cut a character with a similar composition from the virtual world to the physical real world to further tie character together. And there's a little bit of foreshadowing here too with the fires. Like every single thing we did in Unreal Engine it further ties back into the real world too. Because the two are connected, because Mark, our main character, cares so much about, he lives so much in a fantasy and all he wants is for it to be real. And then finally, when the father goes into the virtual world as his son's avatar and kind of the big final emotional discovery, we match cut out where he sees like the blank empty wall that, signifies what his son wishes he could build but can't, or is scared to.
Right. Yeah. So there was something early in my career. I remember it was this. I think he was the CEO of SGI, And he said the thing about at the time where I was working, he goes, "You guys push us harder than the rest of the industry, but you're the smallest part because when we build a wrench, you use it like a hammer." And this actually is fascinating to me to think back to that because I think Epic Games built a game developer engine, and you've now used it as an emotional tool.
Yeah.
And I find, or a tool to find emotion. And I think that, I don't know, I just want to sit with that for a minute, you know what I mean? Because I think that's a really fascinating thing, just to know what creativity can do with something that is, ultimately is technology. I think I don't know,
Yeah.
there's something exciting about that.
Oh, it's really exciting. It's why I'm an Unreal Engine evangelist, and I'm still to this day on projects that aren't even this. I'm still using Unreal Engine to create animatics
Right.
for storyboards for other projects
Right.
now. Again, it's this idea of how do you get people to dream the same dream? And as a director, this is a quote from some famous director, but it's escaping me who. But this idea of the director is actually the least talented person on the film set, which is how it should be. You don't want your director more talented than your actors
Right,
or your
right,
cinematographer.
right, exactly.
They're the specialists.
Right.
You need to be a very inspiring generalist. And so by creating something that inspires the cinematographer to be even better than what anything you can do, just to be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking of. How do we make this better? But suddenly they have a reference point for what you're going for.
Right.
And every idea then that they offer is much better than anything you would do. And that's the point. But also it's just efficient because they know what it is you're looking for.
So to further that, I found that you don't get mired down even in talking here, you don't get mired down in the vocabulary of the tool.
Do not
You
ask
don't-
me about material instances.
Right, exactly, right? You don't get but you understand, and there was had come across another director, and I've actually, in my career, I've found that the most effective directors who use technology know how to keep a distance between themselves and the technology. They know how to ask the technology to do things it's never done before. How did you keep that barrier between the two things? Because I could imagine you could just go down a rabbit hole, and next thing you know, you're a game developer.
Yeah, that's a great question. The truth is, I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes, and I really never got a lot of those rabbit holes to work.
Right.
Despite all the tutorials I watched to do that specific thing in Unreal Engine. So I think the more it was just like find what you can in the marketplace, be scrappy. I mean, anyone who's an independent filmmaker knows the North Star of having to be scrappy. Go on the marketplace, see what you can find that's immediately available just to drop into a scene. Find Mixamo characters with basic animation. You don't care about the perfect animation. Who cares if their feet are touching the floor? That doesn't matter. What matters is what is in frame on that virtual camera.
Right.
Like once you kind of reframe your thinking with Unreal Engine to all that matters is what is in that frame, everything changes.
Right.
And it's a good lesson for me when I do get kind of caught up in the details, which happens all the time. You can lose a lot of time that way. Once you just go back to all that matters is in frame. And I think also having experience on a physical live action film set is great because that ethos
Right.
is completely true. I mean, you look at, especially indie projects, and probably even bigger ones too, but all that matters is in what is in the camera frame.
Right.
And then, all around you'll have, a boom operator
Right.
holding a microphone.
Right.
Like you step outside and you look at the set and you're like, this is, we're actually shooting in someone's house, but we've made it into the zombie apocalypse. But there's the coffee maker over there. It's kind of helpful to remember, all that actually matters is that final output.
Right. Let's talk about characters. So you have characters in the film, but I also found that the other characters that you had in there, we actually just kind of touched on it. the cadence, the rhythm was also to me a bit of a character in the film as well. And then on top of that, also the camera was absolutely a character. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how you worked with not only the cinematographer in the physical space and in the virtual space? Like how did we make sure that that character carried over?
Totally. Great question. So one thing, even before we got on set, one thing I wanted to do was Terrence Malick in Unreal Engine. It's like, what does that mean?
Right.
A lot of handheld, a steady cam feel, and not completely smooth. I wanted to feel the human part of the camera. And goes back to intent, right? If the North Star is our main character goes into the virtual world, but wants it to be the real world, well, then I didn't want to do a lot of fancy camera tricks. I actually wanted to ground it and make the camera feel human. Not just in live action, it's a lot easier to do because there's a human there, but also in the virtual world. And so, this is a look at our Unreal Engine scene. We actually did recreate the entire ranch house set in Unreal Engine, which is pretty cool. So again, the story had these two things interconnected. How did we make the camera? And so what we ended up doing, and I actually have a little clip that kind of goes into it. Maybe I should play the clip because I'll just say the same thing the clip does anyway, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
So I'll play this clip real quick.
Our motion capture team at Riot, and a specific shout out to Ben Roffey, he rigged an actual camera, a real live action camera with motion tracking sensors that our live action cinematographer came out and piloted. All the movement that you see that's handheld in Unreal Engine, that's actually our live action cinematographer breathing and moving. So it gives it a human feel.
Which is really cool, I think. So what the idea here, again, starting from intent, character as camera. In the live action, Anton Fresco, our cinematographer, he's a pro, is used to live action cinematography. What was really cool, and huge shout out to our team at Counterpunch Studios and Riot as well. They took this idea of, hey, we want to do Terrence Malick in Unreal Engine, but more than that, we want Anton's style as a cinematographer in live action to translate over to Unreal Engine. And so the team at Riot, especially Ben Roffey, started experimenting around with, okay, what would it mean to have a cinematographer who's never touched Unreal Engine, who's never done mocap? How would he, when we only have, because it's indie, right? We only have the mocap stage for a couple days. How do we make sure he's set up for success? And so Ben rigged, a camera that he was already used to using with all the motion tracking sensors. And Anton, picked it up immediately. He got into stage, put on the shoulder mount and the Steadicam mount, and was immediately ready to go. I actually kind of loved it because usually, if he wanted to go up a little higher or move a little faster, we could just manipulate the camera in Unreal Engine settings and immediately have it work. So like raise up the sticks, or like,
Right.
oh, I actually want to move a little faster than the characters. Can you make the camera increase the size of the camera by like 25%? And so then he can take one step, but it feels like an additional step. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So the one thing I forgot to mention is that you were also, you jumped with both feet into MetaHuman character creator. And so the thing that we always say about that is basically that's a database of a whole bunch of shapes of heads, and that it's actually anonymous at that point because there's no way to really get to a character, that specific character. Can you tell me what you did with that and your character?
Yeah, I mean, MetaHuman came out right after the fellowship, And I started this storyboard animatic using the Mixamo characters, and then MetaHero came out. And I ended up, for later versions of the animatic, building characters in MetaHuman that looked like the actors we ended up casting.
Right. But it was kind of weird to me because it was like overnight, sort of, right?
It took a couple hours,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Right.
You know, after a couple hours experimenting around with different traits, having never used it before, just watching a YouTube video on how to use MetaHuman, suddenly, you know, I'm creating the characters that look exactly like our main actors.
And is that what was actually used in the film as well, or did it
No.
go through additional?
We ended up, Counterpunch made the characters.
Okay.
And it's so funny. They started production on the characters before MetaHuman came out.
Okay.
So it is what it is.
Right.
But the Counterpunch worked on the characters for Last of Us. So it actually felt like I came full circle. Like
Right.
what initially inspired me
Right.
ended up working with that team, which
Right.
was pretty cool. But it is, I think, really important to think about, you know, if you don't have access to an amazing team like at Counterpunch, you can go into MetaHero right now, or MetaHuman, and immediately start creating these characters.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I know I was put on my heels when I saw your results. So that's pretty cool. So one of the things that I like to tell people who are, you know, they kind of have that that hesitation in getting into something. I always say that there's nothing to it but to do it. And I think that you epitomize that in every way. And I know that I'd just like to thank you, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I want to ask you one last question, and then we'll open it up to anybody who wants to ask a question here. What's next?
Yeah. First of all, I haven't stopped using Unreal Engine to create animatics. I'm still doing that with projects that are currently in production, as well as one I'm working on right now that I'm writing. One thing I'm really hungry to do more of is actually true virtual production with an LED screen, an LED wall. That's like, to me, the future of filmmaking. You know, one reason I'm so bullish on it too, for Waterman, I was on set. It takes place, a lot of the film, shameless plug, it's on Netflix, check it out. A lot of the film takes place in national forests, and you know, it's supposed to be very remote. And I remember being on set one day, and it was for a scene in the film that's like 3 minutes long. And there were 7 semi-trucks parked on a single-lane national forest road, and there were trailers, and there were bathrooms, and all these things. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't really feel great ecologically. And we got to get the shot, because the shot is everything. But at the same time, there has to be a better way. And you know, in the scene, the 2 kids who star in it are walking across a log over a roaring river too. I just remember thinking, God, there's got to be a better way. And then, of course, Mandalorian came out like the next year. I was like, there it is.
Right.
So I do feel like, from a point of view of kind of the future of filmmaking, leaving natural space kind of untouched, especially with these huge budget projects, not interfering with the natural ecosystem, but still getting the exact same texture and intent, but from kind of the safety and control of a virtual stage. That to me is one of the most exciting possibilities of filmmaking. And gosh, I really hope I get to do it soon.
Well, I hope that we have you back here and you can tell us all about that one.
I love
as
that.
well. So
That's what I'm talking about.
yes, exactly.